welcome to another edition of the African Transformation Spotlight, brought to you by the African Center for Economic Transformation. We are an African-led, African-driven economic policy institute based here in Ghana, focused on the entire continent of Africa and connected to the world. My name is Sharmaine Oddoye, Knowledge Manager here at ACET, and today I am joined by Abdul-Aziz Iddrisu, who's a Chief Economist of Government Presidential Fellow, CEoG Fellow, which is a fellowship under the World Bank Africa Chief Economist's Office implemented by ACET. Welcome to the Spotlight.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here to join you on this particular episode.
Abdul-Aziz has played a very critical role in the development of Somalia's Centennial Vision 2060, which is a comprehensive plan at guiding the country's economic transformation. His work, which includes a focus on regional integration, infrastructure development, and key economic policies, aligns very closely with ACET's mission. And in today's conversation, we will start by exploring what the fellowship entails and how it ties into ACET's work, and then go into significant contributions that Abdul-Aziz has made throughout his role. Welcome again, Abdul-Aziz.
Thank you.
As one of the CEoG fellows, could you please share how this fellowship aligns with ACET's broader goals of economic transformation, and then how your work contributes to this mission?
Thank you very much. I think that the fellowship perfectly aligns with ACET's goal and mission of transforming or helping transform the whole of Africa in many ways. One of it is that if you look at what ACET is helping to do is to help African countries go beyond growth, which has not been sustainable over the years. It's been very fluctuating, and it fluctuates with economic shocks because we depend so much on raw materials that we export, raw products, raw commodities, primary products that we export. So if you look at our growth over the years, it's been very volatile. It increased in a flash and begin to decline. And so ACET has set for itself the need to advocate for African economies to go beyond the way we export our primary product. We need to be able to diversify our productivity. We need to also diversify our export base. We need to actually also be competitive in terms of what we export by adding some value. We need to increase our productivity at individual level, at the offices and government institutions. We need to upgrade on our technology. We need to ensure that as we do all of this, it transforms the lives of ordinary Africans across the continent. And if you look at that particular goal that ACET has set for itself, one of it is that they produce high-level research to feed into those policy change. And now, when you develop such high-level research and research output to be able to inform policy and policy directions in Africa, you obviously would need people who can appreciate that level of output that you're churning out. And you need them today and tomorrow. I say today because ACET started this fight long ago, and you need people today to help implement the things that they come out with. And then in the future, you tend to see that you need a very skilled human capital base that appreciates these policies, this research output. And so that's where it ties in with the fellowship. Of course, the fellowship intends to groom the next generation of economic policymakers in Africa, and that ties, with ACET, because when ACET produces the research, they advocate and call all the stakeholders, particularly top-level decision-making in African countries. And when you need to implement some of these things, remember that those who are supposed to take decisions are political leaders who might be influenced by political considerations. And so you need a technical people, and that is what CEoG is trying to do, to groom the next generation of people who can actually assimilate some of this research output and be able to implement them at a technical level. And so you see the synchrony between what ACET is doing and what the CEoG is doing. So ACET provides the input, and the CEoG provides the technical expertise to implement them. So that's where I see both in the short and the long term.
Excellent. So basically implementing the growth with depth framework.
Exactly.
Yes. So let's go maybe a little deeper into your work, your contribution to Somalia's Centennial Vision 2060, particularly in terms of regional integration through infrastructure and economic corridors. So how do these efforts tie into ACET's regional integration agenda? And then what sort of lessons would you share from Somalia that could benefit the rest of Africa from your work?
Of course. Somalia is coming from long years of civil strife. It's taken almost 3 decades. And so you can imagine that most of the infrastructure has been raised down. And over those years, some of them are in deplorable state, and so for you to play a key role, both locally and regionally, you need to position yourself very well. Of course, Somalia is beginning to realize that the way to go is to put in place a long-term plan that sort of transforms, is that okay, and integrate Somalia into the rest of Africa and the world. Somalia has been alienated over the years because of the war, and now that they are coming back, they are seeing that they need to go, they need to do more from the perspective of infrastructure and also economic policies. And I'll take them one by one. If you look at infrastructure, because of the war, a number of things were destroyed. And you see, Somalia is one country that is strategically located in Africa, particularly Horn of Africa. You see, it connects, you see, they have the longest coastline, about 3,333 kilometers, but that has not counted to their favor. Why? Because of the civil war, because of lack of infrastructure. You see that it connects to the Indian Ocean, it connects to the Red Sea, and it connects to the Gulf of Eden. And these 3 routes control about 80% of international maritime trade. And what it means is that Somalia could actually be the route to the rest of the world for Africa, and particularly East Africa. But that has not happened. And so what they're beginning to realize is that it's not happening because nobody wants to come and use OC when the infrastructure is not there. So they are beginning to put in place the plan to develop their infrastructure. Because of all, I mean, if you look at the location, they only have about 3 deep water ports. It's not that they are developing one at Garakad, and which is center of Somalia to be able to drive the trade. But beyond that, they need to look at, I mean, soft and hard infrastructure that will position Somalia as the best route for whoever would want to connect to the rest of the world. And so within the vision 2060, the Centennial vision, of course, that is when Somalia will be 100 years after independence by 2060. Somalia is beginning to do that. And so in my work, one of the things they asked me to do is to look at how to take stock of Somalia's infrastructure and where we need to be to make Somalia the connecting point for the rest of Africa. And if you look at it, for many of them, Somalia cannot do it alone. They would need other African economies because remember they share a number of river bodies together, they share a number of borders, they share common climate and so on and so forth. So they can't do it alone. They also need to probably join some regional blocks to be able to benefit from prioritization of projects in terms of transport infrastructure. And that's why Somalia gradually is warming itself into the rest of. And you see, that ties with what ACET is also calling for, that countries cannot do it alone. They need to collaborate to integrate. And when they integrate, they transform together. And so you see that clearly ties to what ACET is calling for. And the second aspect is that Somalia is looking at providing a very stable state after several years of war. And so they are putting a dedicated pillar on capable state. And what they want to do is to improve peace, is improve stability, bring about accountability, transparency within the country. And that provides the anchor for the private sector to thrive. And you see, Somalia has a very strong private sector because of all the things that have happened to Somalia. I tell you that when Somalia was joining the East African community, they actually performed better in most of the convergence criteria than even the big guys in the EAC. And so Somalia is beginning to put in place all of these policies, all of this infrastructure to make sure that they propel themselves, to make sure that they leverage the regional-wide infrastructure to be able to grow. And they're also beginning to realize that they need to tap into a bigger market. Of course, their income levels are very low, understandably, because of the war, because of lack of employment, and so on and so forth. So you see that these are some of the things that Somalia is doing. In terms of lessons, when it comes to transformation for other African countries, I think that Somalia has learned it the hard way. Many countries in Africa still remain very fragile, but one of the things Somalia is looking at is to up the game. They are coming from a backdrop of a very long period of war, and they are learning that, to transform, they don't need to go back to that particular instability again. And that's a lesson for most African countries who sometimes want to beat the drums of war. They need to understand that would retrogress your economy. Secondly, Somalia has been smart in terms of the blocks that they join, and that's a lesson for some fragile economies. And I say this because you see, Somalia is already part of the Horn of Africa initiative with countries like Eritrea, Djibouti, and then Ethiopia. But there's very little Somalia can learn from some of these people. And that's why recently they decided to accelerate their accession to the EAC, where they have the big boys, they can learn technology transfer, the knowledge transfer, and so they are joining the likes of Kenya, Rwanda, who are making things happen in Africa. And so they decided to join the EAC in order to learn from some of these big people who have transformed, particularly Rwanda, that has transformed its country from ashes to one of the models in Africa today. So, and that ties, like I said, closely with what ACET stands for.
Thank you so much. So you've sort of touched on this a little bit, but what sort of practical solutions is your work on the Centennial Vision 2060? What practical solutions are you coming up with to sort of help with some of these challenges that you've outlined?
All right, thank you. If you look at Somalia's Centennial Vision 2060, it has some key pillars that intends to address the fragility of the economy. The first one, they want to look at a capable state, which is one of the pillars. And practically what they want to do is begin to bring back democracy. They have their own way of democracy, clan-based democracy, the way they elect their parliamentarians and the president. They have their own way, but they want to improve upon that. So they are having a pillar on capable state, where they look at building state institutions. For now, most of the institutions are very weak because obviously they have lost a lot of their fine brains, some corruption perception. So they want to improve upon public sector management, building the institutions, building the people. So they have that pillar, and then of course their economy is not doing badly, not the best, but it's not doing badly. Like I mentioned earlier, they are even doing better than most of the East African economies. But of course, they have the economic cluster where they want to improve on the various sectors of the economy in terms of transforming their productivity. You know, Somalia dwells so much on livestock at the moment. And even that livestock, they actually export live animals. So, and you see, they have huge potential when it comes to fishery because they have the longest coastline. But you see, it's also a culture thing. Somalis don't like fish, they like meat. So, and that's why their focus is on animals. But God has given them so much when it comes to fish. Even if they don't want to eat it, they are beginning to realize that they need to improve on their fishes and then process them, have these cold chains, the value chains along their coast, have the tourism and so on and so forth. So they are beginning to transform the economy, move away from only livestock. They want to even with the livestock process it and challenge countries like Australia, which is making a lot from processed meat. So they are bringing all this on board in their Centennial Vision. And if you go to infrastructure, like I said, they want to build economic corridors that connect most of the African countries so that they become the preferred route to the rest of the world. And if you come to human capital development, they have a pillar where they want to improve upon their education, their health sector, and so on and so forth. So the Vision 2060 is actually a whole package that looks at transforming Somalia's economy and in a way that benefits the ordinary Somali.
Great. So now I want us to just look at your own professional journey as a CEoG fellow. How has this fellowship sort of shaped your own professional journey so far?
Yeah, I would say it's transformed it significantly. If you look at the CEoG fellowship, particularly working for a fragile state like Somalia, you realize that when you work for a country that is fragile economically, politically, and one thing that people even forget is that apart from the war, one of the things that really affects Somali's economy is extreme weather. Somalia has either too much rain or no rain at all, and so you see that when it comes to climate, they are the hardest hit in Africa. So I have learned to actually situate the way economic policy is done within the fragile state context, where you look at almost everything is an emergency and almost everything is a priority. Meanwhile, the country is beginning to warm itself into the provision of basic services to their citizens. So revenues are actually not that much. They have to depend on international organizations. So in terms of my profession, you begin to understand how to actually conduct economic policy in a fragile state. And secondly, you get to work with political actors who would want to prioritize political considerations over economic realities, and so you get to know how to marry those two. How do you achieve the economic transformation and still let the politician see that the political consideration he or she is having is actually bearing fruit? And so I got to learn things like that. I also got to learn that when you work with such people, you need to know how to manage them, manage the time, because almost every day they're on the go. You're in a meeting, and then there's a political meeting, and so many issues that you have to manage at your level. And of course, internationally, it's giving you that exposure, being able to meet key people, key decision makers in Somalia. And of course, recently I had the opportunity to meet the president. I was taken to the president's villa. I was there with some of the international partners, the World Bank, the UN, all of them. You get that kind of exposure, and you begin to understand how to actually manage issues, particularly when there are a lot of interest in those economies.
So it's clearly been a very pivotal chapter in your journey.
Yeah.
So how and why would you encourage development professionals in Africa to seize such an opportunity?
Of course, the CEoG fellowship is a very good opportunity for young people like myself. It affords you the opportunity to understand how policies are making at the national level. You begin to understand how the national cake, so to speak, is shared. You begin to see how different interests tend to conflict, and how you position that. It will help you to understand, particularly in, like I keep saying, the fragile economies where there are different interests, and how you must align some of these things to the greater good of the whole country. So, of course, it's something I would encourage for my colleagues, young ones, to take advantage of. It actually broadens their horizon. They begin to understand how things are done globally.
Thank you so much. So we have come to the end of this episode of the African Transformation Spotlight. Thank you so much for joining us, Abdul-Aziz, and thank you for sharing your work.
You're most welcome. I'm happy, and then always available to share if the need arises. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.